Okay. And we should be good. Let's do this. Cool. Okay. Hey, everyone. So today I'm joined by Coach Zach. Zach is one of the coaches in the Platform Ready Blueprint that we run here at Stronger You. Both of us are coaches who've been coaching for quite a while, competitors as well. And today we're going to be walking you through how we approach peaking for competition, touching on the nuts and bolts of programming in terms of what's different from just standard getting your 5-rep max stronger on your squat, bench, and deadlift. Then we're going to go into physically, how it's actually going to feel different and some strategies to work around some of the increased wear and tear. And finally, closing things out with the psychology of peaking and how you have to mentally prepare yourself differently compared to just your standard training in order to get the highest possible 1-rep max if you're prepping for a 1-rep max test, or even better, your first powerlifting meet. So Zach, stoked to be doing this with you, and let's jump right in.
Yeah, man, happy to be here. So the first thing that we need to kind of establish whenever we're talking about peaking is when's the actual date, right? Like, are we 4 weeks out? Are we 8 weeks out? Are we 12 weeks out? I know that there's a lot of younger lifters, especially, will view the 12 weeks leading up to a competition as like their meet prep. And the reality is, no, the first 8 weeks are preparing you for the last 4 weeks. And we're just steadily, like you said before, getting a little more specific with it, getting a little more geared up and ready to go for actually maxing everything out on the platform. We're trying to hit some target numbers. And it's kind of framing it backwards and then figuring out where are the gaps in the training and how can we get there the most effective way possible. So I know that for myself, right, and for a lot of my lifters, I'll go for a slightly longer block length, especially when we're looking at a competition date, just so we have a chance to, number one, if we're really beat up 10 weeks out, we can kind of incorporate a deload, get things refreshed, recycled, using past training data, of course, to limit any detraining that's occurring at the same time, but then kind of very steadily just brewing it until they're ready to go. But as a direct result of that, that whole process is physically pretty demanding. You can't just be doing that every 8 to 12 weeks. You need to have periods where you're pushing intensity a little bit more, pushing something closer like your 1-rep max, percentage wise, and other times where you can take it a little more chill and build up volume capacity and work capacity.
Yeah, and I think that's really a big differentiation with peaking blocks is you're not going to fundamentally get if you took one 4-week peaking block, for example, and you took a 4-week strength block where you're just generally getting stronger in your 3 to 5 range, let's say, the amount that you would really be able to add to your ceiling and your potential with your lifts is going to be generally higher doing a strength block. And the big change that comes from running a peaking block ultimately comes from your ability to express that strength as opposed to really growing the base of that pyramid to build that bigger peak. And so I think we're both on the same page with most of your year should very much be spent on not peaking. And we've all seen those case studies of lifters where they did 4 meets and they were just living in a peak all year. And then they're like, I don't want to compete anymore. I'm just burnt. Everything feels like crap. I have more injuries than 12 months ago. And I don't want to talk to anybody. And just
Call me my name, bro.
Yeah. And my lifts have stopped going up, right? Because
Yeah.
you're just at the pointy end of that pyramid all the time. Yeah. So that's I think really the big one to have that you'd mentioned is run a little bit of a longer training cycle. Spend your time building your base so that you've earned the right and the privilege really to go and actually work on that pointy end of the stick and testing 1-rep max and building the skills to do that.
Yeah. And that's and you kind of alluded to this, being able to just have the weight on your body is very different. We did exactly what you described this past year, where I competed 4 times and we ran 4 different peaking strategies. I think we got it right the 4th time around the most, because I felt like I finally, aside from a squat depth issue, I basically had a really good meet. But being under 600 pounds multiple times a year as an 82 lifter, it sucks. It's terrible. I'll be taking 580 for a triple 3 weeks out, 4 weeks out, thinking oh, I'm totally good for 285, 617, 623, whatever that number is. and then I get above 600 pounds again, and I'm like, oh no, there's like a clear difference where the weight is, and nope, E1RM calculator or projections made 4 weeks out can, you know, really provide you an accurate assessment of how you're going to feel once you actually get underneath the bar at that point, especially with being like a lighter weightlifter, right? I we found consistently if I pull back early, I show up flat. It's a non-negotiable. I need to basically be taking 100-ish% of my 1 rep max on all 3 lifts within a week or two of competing versus I have a lifter who's 100 kilo or 105. We're peaking him a month out and then we're just rebuilding the block. I have another guy who we know his deadlift, it doesn't detrain quickly at all, but his squat falls off a cliff suddenly. We'll take his last heavy deadlift 2 weeks out. We'll take his last heavy squat 1 week out. Or if he's got a weird schedule with it, we're going to take it 2 weeks out and like really maintain that squat specificity. Maybe take a first attempt or a second attempt within a couple of days of the competition just to limit the amount of detraining he's going to have.
Yeah. So, I mean, that actually brings up a really good point is knowing, hey, if this is your meet date and you're competing on May 20th, right? How many days out are you taking the heaviest squat and your bench and your deadlift? And then, of course, that's going to vary so much like lifter to lifter, but I feel like it's one of the most important things to know because like you said, you'll have some people where they drop off a cliff. And I have one lifter in mind where we'll do like a pump deadlift every 2 months. And I just have like it's a bit scary running that kind of strategy because you're like, I don't have a lot of data on this. I just have to trust that we've been building for the last 8 weeks. And then like boom, there's another 20 pounds or there's another 30 pounds. And it's weird to see that because he's definitely a big outlier. But I mean, we've taken him from a 495 deadlift to 645 over a couple of years. And once we tune into the fact that like not only does he do better deadlifting way less frequently and just doing like all the builder lifts, like he's my like Louis Simmons poster child.
Yeah.
Not that I'm a huge West Side advocate, not that I'm against it, but I'm not like building my identity around it. That style works so well for him where we're going to train all these different things that are basically going to build up, deadlift adjacent. And then every couple of months we go for a big deadlift and it just moves. And so he needs very little skill practice. But I like to think of kind of finding those dates, like those timelines for when am I taking my last heavy lift as like, I almost look at it like, hey, average lifter, Joe Smith, average weight class, normal work stress, reasonably active, not totally sedentary, not working as a stonemason 8 days a week, as kind of like a home base. And then I'll work from there and find, hey, are they, really a lot lighter? Do they have less muscle mass? Are they really strong? Do they have a super physical job? And use those as ways to kind of add or detract from that sort of starting point with, ballpark, you're going to take some openers a week out is sort of a good ish. I think it's kind of the party line with, openers on Monday is like what most people will say for peaking in a meet week, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a really good way to kind of like build the framework, right? Because the reality is a lot of people are getting into it, especially younger kids. They'll hop on a program for 8 to 12 weeks to basically prepare them for X competition that they just signed up for their first competition, like locally with their friends. And it's like at that point, I'm gonna do like the least risky possible strategy as I can. Like you fit all my criteria. You are like, my 180-pound male with normal leverages who is probably prone to this exact same fatigue that like every other 19-year-old is, every other same source of stress. And there's deviations from that. But when we just need to make a game plan and we need to kind of structure it from there, the more boxes we can check with somebody versus somebody else that we've worked with, it just gives us that outline. I've got, 2 lifters who are about the same weight. They squat almost identically. They're both like super hingy. They get down pretty deep in their sticking points, like right out of the hole. And we just basically took one lifter's strategy, applied it to the other one, and just made small, modifications with like, he's more sensitive to leg press volume. If we push it super hard, his knees get achy. So we'll take a little bit less of that, but we know that he needs to be under the bar more. So maybe we'll substitute it for like a belt squat or even a tertiary squat just to have that kind of feeling of the bar on his back, versus the other guy is like, you know, military, so we need to keep his volume relatively low because he's still running every day, you know, and just again, like you said, starting center and deviating as little as possible in a way that like makes sense based on what we've seen and what we know from our other lifters.
Yeah, I like to think about it as it almost depends what peaking strategy you're going to take. These days, I find myself using really one of two strategies for a peak, right? You're either going to end up basically just training up to the meet. And so imagine not doing a big taper or deload or all these things that, I mean, fundamentally do make it more different than your normal training. And instead just saying, hey, I know I'm routinely strongest on Saturdays and Sundays on week 3 of my training blocks. And then my like time to peak is that, whether it's for sets of 5 or sets of 8 or sets of 3 or whatever. Pretty routinely, that's where I'm my strongest. And if you're not sure what that is, take a look at, what week 4 looks like. And if it's worse, well, there you go. But
Of course,
if
and you
you're
didn't just completely overshoot.
exactly right. And as long as, you're being reasonable with looking at the data and not being like, well, I went to 116% of my max. I wonder why I missed. But, tit for tat as much as you can. You can have this peaking strategy where you just say, look, I'm going to run, it takes me 3 weeks to get to my strongest squat. I'm just going to run singles for 3 weeks. And as a really dumb, simple way to do it, if your top set is a single, pick where you want to be on meet day, backtrack another couple weeks. And so you're going to do like your third heaviest squat, your second heaviest squat, and your heaviest squat on meet day. And there's no deload, there's no taper, there's no crazy percentages and adjusting and shifting volumes and all those things. And it works pretty well. And I think especially for a first meet where like realistically winning an open meet doesn't matter. There's a lot of benefits to competing, but nobody cares, right? If you use that as a springboard to go compete at states or nationals, awesome. You're up against like a really qualified set of competitors at that point, and being competitive matters. But I think if you can show up and just be like, hey, I felt pretty strong, I got some experience on the platform, that's awesome, right? And you can remove a lot of stress knowing that like I'm going to be strongest on the third week, so let's just do that. But then there is obviously the more intricate style of doing an actual overreaching point and then really backing off to get that super compensation. Zach, how do you like to approach that style of peak, or who's a lifter you would pick that for over just training into the meet?
Yeah. So first with like training into the meet, if I have somebody who I'm onboarding and they're like, oh, I'm competing in 16 weeks, like first thing we're doing is establishing that time to peak that you alluded to and just creating as much consistency as possible. From there, relatively tapering them down over an extended period of time. Maybe we do like triples, doubles, singles on their deadlift. I'm a big fan of using variable top sets on squats, and I've had a lot of success with all my lifters at this point with that, where we don't even necessarily have to do a single on the squat before competing or before testing a max. Even doing a double or doing a triple to get that weight on your back, but not get so much of that like axial loading that the fatigue is just too much for you to recover from, I think is a huge thing. And then likewise with bench, I run singles almost year round with several of my lifters. There are some people who need more periodization with the top set approach, but we do a lot of that on a secondary day, or we do a lot of that with volume management on a tertiary day. But in terms of people who would be benefiting from super compensation, number one, people who are just resilient, right? If they are able to just dump fatigue very quickly, that is a really good sign. Like if your week 1 doesn't feel like absolute dog shit, right? Like after you had like an RP9 triple, the like 3 days later and you're squatting again and like you don't feel like you're a brittle piece of glass, there's a good chance you're a good candidate for that, because you can just handle that very high intensity and you recover very quickly from it. That's number one. And number two is just understanding that despite the lifter's individual ability to handle fatigue and handle intensity and how they relate to each other, it's also how quickly they detrain on different lifts. So generally speaking, deadlift detrains the slowest, where you can kind of get away with, again, like doing your last heavy deadlift 2 weeks out for a generic lightweight lifter versus one week out with the squat or versus like one week out with the bench and then some heavy bench the week of the meet. Um, Different lifters may require different things for their individual lifts. So I have thinking of like Marcellus Williams talked about Bob Matthews, how keeping heavy leg press in is for some reason like super integral to his squat showing up on meet day. And we're talking about someone who's like, I want the strongest 110 in the world or something like that. He currently holds the record or was just broken by somebody else very recently. Um, it's a combination of their ability to handle the intensity, to recover. If they have some like aches or pains, I'm obviously not going to like keep pushing them, right? But then it's also just how skilled are they with the movements and how quickly does it detrain? I know for myself, my bench is as technical as it gets, I would say. And if I don't touch a certain percentage of like what I'm going to be doing for my top set earlier on in the week, it will not show up. Like I know I'm supposed to be doing like a 402 single potentially this Friday. I had to do at least 350 to 360 on Monday in order for it to like stay alive.
Yeah, and I mean you're a very intensity sensitive lifter in that regard. I mean, at least for your bench, right?
Yeah, I'd say even like all three, like this is the first volume block, quote unquote, that we're doing since I started working with Sean. It's like block 19. It's the first time I've seen a set above 5 on my squat. Um, and we very quickly found like, hey, I can handle, I can do 220 and then 240 on my squat like 2 days apart, 3 days apart for reps. Um, but then I go into like deadlift the next day and just loading a red onto the bar. I had such a sick lower back pump. I'm like, this is gonna be a rough fucking day, dude. So I think that like we're finding out now that I'm actually decently sensitive to fatigue anyways on all three of my lifts. I was just using such load limiting variations where everything was either paused or like a slow tempo up until this point that like we never knew.
Right. Yeah, it's just you would have no way to have the data effectively.
Yeah, and that's going back to the idea like if I had to work with someone in a short period of time, I'm not going to suddenly switch them from like tempo squats over to RPE driven regular sets of 5 on their squat if we were capping it intentionally using the tempo before. It's like we don't know what's there, and a lifter who's doing the right thing, who's staying true to RPE, could just be beaten down by the absolute load that their body's being exposed to at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, the way that I almost look at it with like peaking strategy is if I got somebody and they're coming to me with anything less than twice as much time as I need them to peak with, right? Where I can fundamentally, I can just run 2 peaks and like use one to find out and use the other one to compete, right? Um, the way that I like to approach it is training into the meet is basically your safe bet. You collect all of the data you need to know how to train into the meet. And just going back to that week 3 example, if you're strongest on your week 3, just work backwards in increments of 3 to know how many training blocks you're going to do. Um, and you'll know how aggressively you have to deload or if you space that out with that based on your situation. But if somebody's coming to me and they're saying I've got to compete in 4 months and you know I want to be as strong as possible and have that be reliable, I'm going to say, all right, I'm not much of a gambling guy. Let's do the thing that we know works, and it also gives us basically an extra training cycle to keep getting stronger. So we've got 25-35% more time to actually get you stronger instead of focusing on just sharpening the pointy end of the stick, and throw a couple singles in there to just get you comfortable with it halfway through that peak to gauge how much of that we need to do. And there we go. If you get those first couple singles and you're like, what the math says you should be at based on your 3 rep max is pretty close to what you're taking for a single. We're not seeing any big skill issues with you just like having your second rep be a lot better than your first routinely. Cool. Let's train into the meet. Let's keep this simple and like just have you show up on a day where you're going to be confident in your ability to perform because you have several training blocks behind you showing, yep, week 3 strongest, week 3 strongest. What's today? Week 3. Cool.
Yeah, and not having to deal with the experimentation of it is one like net positive, but like you were kind of alluding to with the confidence, like psychologically for the lifter. If we're running somebody like a train through style of a peaking where we know consistently, hey, like on week 3, your knee always feels kind of funky, or your hip always feels kind of funky, or like week 3, you always like totally shit the bed, but then week 4, you can magically add 12 kilos. Like I have a lifter who randomly, like, once they get above a certain percentage of 1 rep max on their squat, they go from a very like controlled eccentric to just fucking dive bombing it. And then the next week it's back to that controlled eccentric because they feel like they realize afterwards, like, oh, I need to control this. But having that kind of consistency and then being able to look back and say, hey, like, I know you're stressed because it's meet week. Like, this is 75% of your max for a squat single, and it feels fucking terrible.
Yeah.
But look how fast it's moving. Look how dialed in your tech is at this point. Look at how, you know, we know that your knee is going to clear up in 2 or 3 days because it always does. And at this point, we're not only doing the things that we've already been doing that have been working, that you can look back for yourself and see have been working. We're also taking a little bit extra off the top end. You're not really pushing your accessories, or we're even taking a lot of them out. So those little like joint aches and pains should start to come out with it too. So however your normal week 4 or week 5 feels, suddenly you're going to feel a whole lot better, when
Yeah.
we get to the other end of that.
Yeah. And I find, with that train through strategy, you don't have to back off as hard on accessories. And again, it's just one more thing to start guessing with, right? When you're like, well, am I Bob? Do I have to keep leg press in, or should I be pulling that out so I can really, push a little harder? And I mean, how I like to approach it is I'll pretty much, if I'm training right through, maybe the last session, I'll dial back the volume a little on accessory work. But if I'm training through, I've got kind of that formula. I'm going back to that home base of like, hey, when I've been doing these things, I've been my strongest. So I gotta have a really good reason to change that.
Yeah.
And then you're starting to flirt with the whole like super compensation idea again. And you got to pick what's the recipe you're using here.
Yeah.
And
I
you
think a
can't
lot
just
of it,
go half-ass and be like, well, train through, but then I'm also going to pull accessories back here and I'm going to increase volume over here. And it's like, well, what are you doing at this point?
yeah. And I think a lot of it has to do with just like the reason why you're doing the accessory in the first place. Like a lot of lifters will come in, they're like, oh, I shouldn't be doing any accessories the week of the meet. It's like, oh, let's see what accessories are doing and why they're there in the first place. Like a machine chest press that we're using on like a secondary bench day to just draw blood into your chest. You're not necessarily pushing super hard. Okay, well, maybe take that at like a 6 or a 7. We don't have to actually push it to an 8, 8.5, 9 like we normally would, but we still want that benefit of it. Likewise, something like a lat pull down, 1 or 2 days out, I don't think that's going to be doing anything for you, right? Like maybe we'll do a little bit of leg press, maybe we'll cut the volume in half just so you can feel your quads working, but again, we're not really pushing it too much. It goes back to the reason why it's there in the first place, and then tapering it from there. And then as far as like super compensation goes with that whole approach, if I'm let's take the situation where we're 2 weeks out, right? And we're going to peak everything 1 week out, and then we have the meet. 2 weeks out, I'm sandbagging accessories. It's RP 6 to 7. It's just moving the muscle at that point. 1 week out, the exact same deal, maybe a small progression, but we all know that like you're killing yourself at this point in the gym. You have your RP 9 105% squat 1 RM attempt.
Yeah.
So doing like chest supported rows afterwards, we all know it's not going to be productive just because systemically you're so gassed. We still want the muscle to move, but like I'm not going to be worried about you progressing that. And then likewise, week of the meet, if it's a true super compensation, I might take everything out. If I have a lifter who just like gets super beat up, and maybe instead of having like that scenario where Saturday they can take a big squat and then they're good to go again the following Tuesday, maybe if they need an extra day or two or they're a little more intensity sensitive, I'll just take all the fucking accessories out at that point. Like, just recover at that point, dude. Like,
Yeah, I know for myself, like thinking back to the last time I competed, personally, what I find is if I end up doing, it's like there's a systemic, like a total amount of work that I have to do to just feel like I'm like in the pocket with lifting in general, where I'm not even sure how to explain it, but I just feel mentally flat if I haven't like gone and
I need a back pump, bro. Like,
yeah, exactly. Like
let me do
I
some
need to feel
pull-ups.
my
Let me do
lats.
some
Like
bicep
every
curls.
time I stop doing lat pull downs, my bench looks like a bunch of warm spaghetti noodles.
Yeah.
Right. It just is what it is. And so I trained my lat pull downs really hard going into meet week because I've tried going into a really heavy bench session and pulling back on the lat pull downs and testing that stuff without having it all be on the line and having a meet, but just testing period and training. And when I didn't do those, pretty routinely, I ended up feeling like crappy on my bench. And then, you get to meet day and you're like, well, why did I pull all those accessories? And you start to really go back on yourself and you're wondering like, well, okay, lesson learned, I guess. And as long as you're paying attention, you'll find that stuff. But I think that goes back to the idea of if you have the time to run effectively like a soft peak in training to get all those data points and try something, then you can create the model where you're not trying to make decisions when you have a really hard deadline right around the corner. And instead, you can just be like, all right, cool. That's how this is going to feel. My knee's going to bother me on week 3, and on week 4, I'm going to come back in PR. It's going to, all those little things. And like the aches and pains become more predictable. I think the one thing that I find physically is really, really different though with peaking, and it's not so much, what's the word I'm looking for? It feels less routine with like regular training, and it's more like the intensity ranges, like being up in that 90% plus. I know, especially for my squat and my deadlift, um, it just feels like I'm a little more dead outside the gym. Like everything's a little more
I'm
flat.
I'm
Like,
I'm walking through fog, dude. I'm functionally useless the exact second I get above like 580 on anything.
yeah,
Like, um, going into New Jersey States, originally I was going to compete the week prior at PA Nationals before I got hit with that suspension. So we basically just added a week to the peak when I was already like pretty beat up. I remember this exact moment, like the week of the meet, where we had hit everything, we're tapering off pretty aggressively. Someone like literally came over and was like snapping in front of me to try and get my attention. I'm like, dude, slow down. I was like trying to read through a patient's chart, and someone was just asking me a very basic question about like if I was ordering lunch or something. I just couldn't process multiple things at once because just you're not beat up at that point. Like, okay, maybe things are a little achy. Maybe you feel like you got to really grab the railing when you're walking up the staircase, but you're just like foggy.
yeah. Yeah, foggy. I call it like crispy, but you're just a little fried. And I really feel like there's just like a systemic, like a neural fatigue component to handling those really heavy weights. Whereas you go do a set of 5 and like you can hit a pretty heavy set of 5 without getting that to that same degree.
Yeah, and I think we know that it's a thing, right? Because lifters will get this like huge, they're so hype on their top set, and it's their like 3 rep max, and they got RP9, all their friends are around, and then you ask them what they're doing for their accessories, and like, I just don't have the energy for it. We know like in the acute term, it's a thing that happens same day, right? Like in regular training. But then we know that peaking is intentionally making that more difficult and stretching that out over a longer period of time. And it just affects you outside of the gym. You start to look for little things to do to like maximize recovery as much because like you're not sleeping well at that point. Like you always are sleeping on the wrong side of the bed. You wake up and you're just like sitting on the edge of the bed for a couple minutes, kind of feeling your back out before you get up. It's like you just took like a bench single and like maybe 2 deadlift singles the day before, but your body's just trying to clear everything out so much. Like sleep is just goofy. You need to find ways to like make it as good as possible because it's just otherwise gonna carry into your day to day so much.
Yeah, like I almost look at like getting stronger on 6s and 8s from a recovery standpoint. Like it's almost like, at least relative to peaking and like heavy singles, it's almost like playing in the shallow end of the pool a little, where it's like you can kind of just like eat well, give yourself a couple days, and you're gonna bounce back as long as you're not being insane about training volumes and doing like GVT 10 by 10s a couple times a week and stuff like
Yeah.
that. Um, what I found actually to be a really good strategy for myself, and I actually advise a lot of lifters that I work with to do this as well, is like, hey, you might not have to do this 52 weeks out of the year, 365, but when you're in a peaking phase, you got the understanding that like recovery is going to be harder. So it probably stands to reason that doing things that will increase your recovery are probably warranted. And, it can be as basic as just being a fucking robot about your sleep hygiene and your sleep routine and being like, I'm not watching Netflix tonight. I'm going to sleep because I'm going to be a lot more mad, not seeing the season finale, or sorry, I'm going to be a lot more mad seeing the season finale and missing my top set because I was tired versus the other way around. And the other thing I found as well is contrast showers. I don't know if you ever mess with hydrotherapy at all.
No, no, not at all.
So I find for myself, and this is probably early stages from like pre-diagnosis when I had AS. I still have it, but before I got a diagnosis and knew what the hell was going on, is like it really eats at a lot of like the connective tissue and like surfaces on my joints and my elbows just didn't feel amazing. And one of the best things I did, especially on those heavier loads, like 85, 90% even, is just right after my workout, getting a couple hot cold cycles in a shower and just going as hot as I can tolerate for about a minute, cold as I can tolerate, which is definitely the worst part of the two, for about a minute, and just like flipping the shower back and forth and like, doing little circles in the shower. Um, and just a couple cycles, like 2, 3 rounds. And I found it made a profound difference in how quickly I was able to pop back. Like I could cut recovery time down by about a day between sessions, which felt huge, honestly, in the context of a peak at least.
It's funny that you say that because a couple of the guys that I train with pretty regularly, and they're strong dudes. They both squat like one of them squats over 700, one of them squats in the mid sixes, 500 plus dots lifters, right? Um, they literally found a place that they live like 15 minutes away from each other. They found a place in the middle that is exactly it's a spa house is what it is.
Sure.
You get
Yeah.
your own private room, and they have the sauna, and then they have the cold room. And
Oh,
the
yeah.
one dude was describing going from like being in the sauna for 20 minutes to immediately jumping in the water. And I'm like, that sounds fucking terrible. I'm like, my medical background, I'm like, dude, you're just like looking for like hypovolemic shock. Someone's gonna find you face down in the pond. But now that you say it like that, I'm like, oh, that actually like going back and forth, dealing with that inflammation, and then dealing with the numbing effect from the cold. I'm like, oh, that might actually have some merit, especially for people again who are like particularly intensity sensitive, or who like putting their phone in the other room at the end of the night and taking a melatonin and getting their 8 hours just like isn't cutting it. That might be something else to really look into for them.
Yeah, and even I'm trying to think like what are some other ones? Simple stuff, and it's extra. Like it does take more time. It's an extra 5 minutes after your workout. Slotting in a 30-minute nap a couple times a week. As just extra sleep time, not to make up for the sleep that you're missing. Go
Yeah,
get that.
yeah,
But having the extra sleep time it takes extra, and if you have the time to do it, it's like, well, I'm 2 weeks out. I'm gonna really try to lock in and show up as recovered as I can. And it's crazy how I'm sure if we could all do this and had the bandwidth to take naps and have all meals perfectly timed, all these things that are nice, but realistically don't happen all the time. It would be cool, but like locking in for that for a really constrained amount of time still has a lot of benefit. And you say, this is what I do in the last couple of weeks of meet prep. And if you can build that out, which we're probably getting a little more advanced than first meet here. But if you look at that kind of stuff, like I find it just makes the meet day feel a lot better. Like I show up and I don't feel so banged up, which then breeds further into me feeling like I feel mentally good
yeah,
going into that meet day. Like I've had going back to that knees comment with connective tissue there. My knees were horrible, like for as long as I've always known. And being able to show up at a meet and not think about my knees means I can just focus on lifting the damn weight.
yeah.
As opposed to like, did I get enough Advil to have my knees feel okay?
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be high level stuff. Something as simple as like instead of scrolling on your phone on Instagram on your lunch break, just putting in your earbuds and listening to music and just closing your eyes. Like my wife is somebody who like can't take naps during the day. But when she needs to take a nap, like she's always worse off for it, and just like having quiet time, right? She runs marathons. It fills that gap that some people just need. Having no mental stimulation for a good like 20 or 30 minutes here and there is a way to just ease that mental fatigue, ease that like, neurological needing to respond and act constantly when you're already gassed out and you're already burnt out.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I feel that on at a core spiritual level there. I'm like, my default is to go for like more stimulus and more dopamine on my
Yeah.
downtime, right? I'm like,
Yeah.
well, I'm just gonna go like ride mountain bikes as fast as possible and like marathon Netflix while I'm scrolling Instagram.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
like, and then it's like, why am I so fucking tired? And like reframing it as, hey, this is I'm what am I gonna do? I'm gonna actively do nothing for a little bit.
Yeah.
And like, not everyone's going to be able to take naps because they'll have like a panic attack at 3 p.m. in their bed. But, cue Huberman Lab NSDR track or whatever, because it's at least enough stimulation where you can hear something, but focus on not doing much. Um, the binaural beats aren't bad if you mess with those as well. Like they're a little woo, but they work pretty well for just having something that's not the sound of the thoughts in your head.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And speaking of like the thoughts, right? I think ultimately what it boils down to is what you want to be doing with it, right? If you're somebody who's just trying to enjoy this, if you're like let's be honest, outside of the very, very, very few top 0.05% people, nobody's doing this for a living. If you just want this to be the hobby sport that it is for the overwhelming majority of people, and you don't necessarily, if you're cool with making 5 kilos a year, and you're cool with making small amounts of progress, and you're cool with just like having a sense of balance, maybe just train through, dude. Maybe just have a system that works well for you, but also provides you that kind of balance where you don't feel that mental fatigue. You don't feel that like, you're sitting there at your desk drooling in the middle of the day because you just took an RPE 9 deadlift and have an RPE 9 squat tomorrow. Like, having a more balanced kind of approach with it relative to the rest of your life may be something you want to consider doing.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's, some people it's a choice to do that. And like, hey, do I want to feel like crap? Do I want to be able to, just train through and know I'll be a little tired after I compete because it's a big day, but outside of that, the other 27 days of the month are going to be all right. Um, I can I've been in the sport for a while at this point. We'll put it that way. And I used to be when I was, I don't know, 15, 16, whatever it was, starting out, I was like, well, I need to maximize it. I have to, right? Like you fall into this trope of like, it's performance sport. I have numbers that show me how well I can do.
Yeah.
Now, why would I do anything that's not going to give me the highest number? And it's like, well, when you're 15, yeah, you can have your whole life revolve around that. And then just like, I guess now you can use ChatGPT to do your homework or whatever. Which I mean, missed out on that, but
Yeah.
whatever it is, right? And you can just have your whole life be about lifting. And that's cool. If you can do that, like I'm a little jealous, sick. But, you get to being what, 20, 25, and suddenly it's like, well, nah, my wife wants to hang out. I want to hang out with my wife too. I want to not be a zombie when she asks me a question. I want to go have a barbecue on a Sunday afternoon and be able to walk the barbecue across the field or whatever, right? And it's like, well, yeah, I find that like you said, that 0.005% of the sport, those people are awesome and they're really entertaining to watch, but I almost look at it as a different sport. I'm like, those are the people at the pointiest end of the sport. Go look on open powerlifting to meet results. Those are not power, like it's powerlifting, but that's not the sport in the spirit of the sport. You go to a meet and like look at how many default medals still go out. I have nothing against that. And
I
you
will never forget the very first time I walked into the war room. I train at the same gym that Gavin Aiden does.
yeah.
The very first, I didn't know who Gavin Aiden was at the time, but I walked in and he had like 700 something pounds on his back. And I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like walking on this like cocky 82 who can squat like mid fours thinking I'm the hot shit. I
Yeah,
walk into
coming
this
straight from
little,
a commercial gym.
yeah, this little meatball of a man has like weight that like super heavyweight lifters are trying to hit on his back, and he weighs like 8 pounds more than I do. I was like, yo, what the fuck is this? And that's the reality. It is a completely different world, and it scales too. Like I'm more on that spectrum, I would say, compared to the average lifter. You know,
Yeah, I mean, look at the numbers. You're performing at a national level.
yeah, my nutrition is dialed in, my sleep is dialed in, my stress, my training, everything is dialed in. But I'm still accepting of like that is different. That is just a whole different scale. And there are gonna be meets like we did. They had a Powerlifting America meet at my gym, and that was the first one I did for PLA. I just did it for fun, right? Because I was there. We had like a good block that was going. I'm like, oh, we'll just do an SBD day, and it ended up being like one of my better meets, and I just enjoyed it and had fun with it.
Yeah. And
And
I think long term, like being able to do that, because you're not going to get to your strongest in 3 years or whatever people think
yeah,
they're going to do, right? And if you can find that model that works for you, odds of you finding whatever your strongest lifts are way higher if you can find something that actually integrates with your life where you can dial all these things.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But
as a sidebar, I think finding a way to integrate it is one thing, and then also like trying hard enough to actually make it integrate is another. Like resting 5 minutes between sets is not trying to integrate it.
Yeah. If you don't have like a 2 minute time, I walk into the gym and at this point, my iPhone, like with the location, it has a Siri notification that pops up. It's a suggestion. Would you like to start a 2 minute timer? Because that's how long I take to step.
Yep.
Like I literally walk in the gym and it gives me that notification. And it's like just being understanding of like, I've got a job. I've got a life. I've got a wife. I've got to work. I've got to do X, Y, Z. I'm not going to be here for 3 hours, dude. I'm not 19 anymore. I've got a big boy job. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Wake up in the morning.
Yeah. Like I was actually thinking about this a lot the other day. I'm like, well, what are all the things that are different at this point? I'm like, well, as a business, it's not just like me being a solopreneur, right? Like I work with you, I work with Faith, I have a separate in-person business as well. And this, even at a work level, it pulls me in so many different directions. I deal with 6 times as many people as I did when I was 18,
Yeah.
right? Like you said, you got relationships, you got friends, you got all these things. And like, my wife isn't a power lifter. She's really supportive of all the meathead crap that I do. But like, spending time in the gym together is not exactly our love language.
No, I
And
would not talk to Julianne in the gym.
no, no, exactly. I mean, I train in my garage, and half the time, like Candace doesn't even want to be in there with me. She's like, it's not relaxing for me to be in there when you're grunting, you know? But like, there's all these things that are going to pull you in so many different directions. And like, the reality is, hey, like you said, not 19 anymore. You got all these big boy responsibilities. So if you really want to do this, part of the thing you have to do is try hard enough to actually make it integrate where you're happy with what you're getting out of it. And I really feel like the biggest commodity we're all going to deal with is time. And I see so many people that are like, well, I just don't have the time to train for a meet. I'm like, well, you kind of do, because it's literally one extra day. Basically everything else is going to stay the same. Outside of like a 45-minute drive to some local gym or banquet hall or wherever they hold your open meet, you're going to spend like 3/4 of a day going somewhere. And outside of that, you're going to just go to the gym. So it's mentally, do you want to do a meet? Not logistically, can you do a meet?
Yeah.
Right. And I think honestly, if you can train 3 days a week, hour and a half a piece, bare minimum, if you're being responsible with that training time, you can do it.
Yeah. You can go bare bones with it and you can just kind of, coast into it without having to interrupt everything
Yeah.
else in your life.
And counterpoint, if you have the time to do 3-hour training sessions and you're happy with everything else outside the gym, time wise, do it. It's really relaxing to take long rests.
Yeah, yeah. And I think Joe Bornstein, um, he just totaled 900 or something at 83. I think he said on his stories before that he will, for his like primary SBD at the end of the block, he'll be at the gym for like 6 hours. He'll take an hour between his squat and bench, an hour between his bench and deadlift, as if he were at a meet,
Yep.
and simulate it and like visualize that as much as possible. So when he talks about hitting these big numbers, he's literally pacing himself based on like what other meets have run, how long they run, and this and that. And it's like that again, that's that other end of the spectrum.
Hyper specificity, max performance. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like if you can make that work, dude, that's great. But at the very least, just knowing that you've been training for a couple weeks and you know what's going on, and like your week 4 always feels good, and you hit these numbers that suggest just sitting there, the day or two beforehand that you're at your job. If nothing else, it gives you something to look forward to, right? And it's like I'm gonna take the things I've done and I'm going to codify them on the platform. I'm going to like make it official. I'm going to go after this number I've been chasing. Um, and when you are dealing with like the mental cloudiness and the just being gassed out and having no energy and no will to do anything, it's like, oh, that's an exciting thing you have to look forward to at least.
Yeah. And I know for myself, like, I think ultimately one of the reasons I've stayed with it is I like having the big scary goal. I've tried coasting, right? On just like, yeah, I'm just gonna go like chill for a bit and do whatever, right? And whether that's lifting or work or other projects, like I end up kind of depressed when I don't have this thing where I'm like, ah, shit, I don't know if I can do this, but let's go find out, right? And routinely when I'm like, hey, let's do this thing, I am terrified of what could happen, but I'm very excited to see what could happen as well. Let's go do it. I find just the focus you get from having a meet date or an end of block goal, even,
Yeah.
it keeps me so on track, because I probably would have quit lifting a long time ago if I didn't have that idea of a goal. Because like I would go do 55 different workouts
Yeah.
and like just show up and have a casual 20-minute workout some days and go work out for 4 hours other days and be totally unstructured. It's who I am. But being able to have those goals and those big picture goals that keep you on like the straight and narrow with training, and then having the benefit of seeing quantifiably, like, damn, I am 10 pounds stronger than last time. That's sick.
Yeah.
Um, is so cool, especially looking back. If you want to go big picture, look at like the first time you ever lifted and like, yeah, okay, cool. So I'm that, 6x, 8x, whatever it is, right? Um, and one of the things I think that you could, well, if we'll wrap this up, I think one of the biggest differences from just regular training to those heavy lifts, going back to that skill idea, is the skill of handling those heavy weights. And part of it's that, like, if I do a 5 rep set, I can go up in weight and do like 3, and it's probably going to feel pretty close, right? And even if I'm super nervous and all these things, and let's say I did like 425 for a squat for 5, and then go up to like 440, I'm like, I should be able to do that for a pretty good triple. Shit the bed, I can do like a double, but like it's not a complete failure if I do a double. Like I got some reps, I got some exposure, I felt the weight on my back. One of the biggest, I think, mistakes that I see lifters do is they only look at the training when they're going into a peak, and they fail to look at creating that positive mental imagery, and then they just get to those singles and they don't have the mental skill set and they choke. And then you watch it, and going back to that lifter you talked about where they just dive bomb on week 3 and then remember and do better on week 4 again. We're like, I have to control it. um Being able to just create that super clear mental image in your head and take 2 minutes a day and just be like, look, I'm going to squat this at the meet, these are my targets for the end of the block on week 3 of my squat cycle or whatever. I'm going to squat 455 at this meet. I'm going to bench 315. I'm going to deadlift 495. Sure. And then visualize those plates on the bar and visualize yourself doing it and make a little mental movie and spend 2 minutes, like clock 2 minutes instead of 3 Instagram reels. Just do that instead. And that little mental movie, the more reps you get with that, the less nervous you get when you get under the bar, because you'll have done it by the time you get to the meet 20 plus times, and you know what it looks like. If somebody was watching you, you know what it looks like from the first person. You can feel it, you can smell it, right? And the only thing you haven't done is actually lift the weights. And so you can just go hit it on autopilot and try really hard, which is ultimately all you're going to end up doing anyways when you get under a heavy single. You're not thinking about pushing your knees out or
No,
whatever cute, like it's not happening. And
the
so
second you think about the bar on your back, you are dead in the water. It is
yeah,
done.
yeah, I just think about like trying to think what goes through my head when I do a heavy lift. I'm like, set up really well before I actually like load the weight and unrack it or initiate pulling the slack on the bar on a deadlift. Get crazy tight, feel locked in, and then like kind of just like come out on the other side.
Yeah.
Is your
Yeah.
little time portal. And so if you can go through that rhythm in like a couple minutes a day, having that visualization exercise is just this additional thing. And going back to those, what do the best people do when they're peaking for a meet? They do a little extra. It might be your hydrotherapy, it might be your sleep hygiene, it might be your visualization. 2 minutes a day. Set a timer, right? And just start working through those PR lifts. And if you can do that, like your odds of actually getting there are so much higher, just because you're not gonna, or your odds of choking are lower, because it's not all new at that point. It's just physically doing it is new. Everything else is routine.
Yeah. The bar will always be heavy on your back when you're maxing something out. It will never feel good. But how you frame that in your mind and the way that you think about it leading up to that attempt is ultimately going to be the thing that dictates how it goes. If you are like completely married to an idea with like no give, like we are talking about with visualization, like those target numbers, they may shift and that's a-okay, but you need to have some kind of goal with it, right? You need to have some kind of process. And I always tell my lifters, I'm like, think about doing more than you want to actually do and make that higher number casual so that number that your actual target is, like if you want to squat 270, tell me you want to squat 280, because when you get to 270, you're thinking about 280 now. You're not worried about it. You can just do the thing that you need to do because you're like, oh, I can do 280, right? Like it's not that big of a deal. And just like you said, go on autopilot at that point. You've gone through the process, you've done the rituals, just trust yourself.
Yeah. And you can even practice like that visualization, those targets. in your lifts. Like I have a lighter squat day, and my biggest trope with squats is when it's light, I coast, which
Yeah.
is dumb, right? With where my weak point is, it's super dumb. But the best thing I ever did for my squat was like think about my end of block goal, add some change plates on it, and doesn't matter what the bar weight is. Every time I touch the bar for a squat, I'm just thinking about 505 instead of 495.
Yeah.
It is what it is. That's all. The only damn thing on my mind is that. And then I approach it and I just start doing, I've done reps with 5 plates and some change a gajillion times in my head. Where then by the time I eventually get to a 5 plate safety bar squat, which we'll get there, I'll have done it. And then I'm just thinking about the weight that's on the bar because I've been thinking about that weight for years.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyways, let's wrap this up. We've gone down the damn rabbit hole today. So okay, we talked about peaking. We've gone through everything from 2 different kinds of peaks that like nuts and bolts of actually designing a peak and figuring out your timing on everything. We've talked about physically navigating that landscape. We talked about psychological landscape of things. Um, Finish off with some, pretty actionable points on what lifters can do to actually, improve their recovery and manage their mental and pick a strategy ultimately. Um, Zach, I think maybe the best place to finish off today is just going through like if people want to learn more about this powerlifting thing, they can follow your lifting at ZL_STBB.
Yeah. Gotta
You
change
got
it.
it? Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll post it all up in the notes. I'll do a little caption or something. But they can follow you there, and you can follow me at Stronger UPT for powerlifting coaching on Instagram is the most active platform that we're on. And if you want a copy of what I call the first powerlifting meet guide. It outlines basically a big analysis of a bunch of meet results from last year. So if you want to see like how strong you'd need to be to actually be competitive at a meet, I've got a whole guide for that. If you follow me on Instagram and DM me the word first meet, I'll send you a copy of it. Zach, as always, man, it's been a pleasure. We'll see you on the next one.
Cheers.
Bye.